Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. Ruth is a visiting professor at a large university in Ireland, and Claire is an associate professor at a primarily undergraduate university in Northern California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss. Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ruth. And today we're talking about discussing grades with students. But before we do that, Claire, how was your week?
My week was good. I wanted to mention this fun show that Ralph and I have been watching, which is called Worth It. And it's a BuzzFeed show. And they go around, there's these two guys that go, and what they do is they pick a type of food every episode, so like tacos. And then they say they go to 3 excellent taco places at 3 drastically different prices and then decide which one is most worth it for its price.
Ooh. And is it really always fun. The most expensive one?
It's not always the most expensive one, you know, because, it's worth it for its price. So, yeah. And it's really cool. I mean, they go a lot of different places. They're based in L.A., which is fun since we're going on sabbatical in L.A., so we're like, we should go to this donut place or whatever, you know. But then they also go, other countries and other cities. And anyway, it's just fun to watch them discuss the food and be like, oh, I love the creaminess of this. And then in the end, they're like, this one was the most worth it for me.
Do you know, it's so funny, sometimes just watching people chat about stuff. Do you know, or being, I don't know. Because I was thinking about the Great British Baking Show and someone was like, I can't eat gluten or eggs. And they were like, well, why would you want to watch that? And I was like, it doesn't even matter if I would, you know what I mean? It's just hearing people enthusiastically discussing something or, yeah.
Totally. Cool.
And then it is extra cool that you're going to move to LA and check out all these places. Yeah. That's super cool.
What about you? How was your week?
My week was amazing because...
What?
I know. I got to go to the cinema, which was borderline a bit too much for me, COVID anxiety-wise. Mm-hmm. But I did get to go and see West Side Story, which I have been so excited about since I saw the trailer for the new one. And oh my God. And it's kind of weird because for my foster sister and me, it's a big, we always watch West Side Story a lot and I'm very obsessed with it. Kind of not musicals in general, but West Side Story... I just love it so much. Cool. And so when the trailer came out, I was still living in America. I don't even know, was it right after the pandemic started? But I was like, imagine if we managed to see this together somehow. Mm-hmm. And then so we did actually get to go together and see it. And it was just amazing. It was so amazing. But we had to move in the cinema because we both kind of felt seasick at the beginning. I guess it's been so long. I mean, there was a weird vertigo-ish opening where it's kind of looking down on stuff, but it was just weird to see stuff on the big screen. We haven't done that in so long.
Wow.
And the movie, Steven Spielberg is just a literal genius. He is just so amazing. The whole thing, and because I feel so strongly about it, there was one character who I from the trailer I was like, I don't, but then he was perfect, and it's just amazing.
Oh, I love that.
Amazing.
I love that. That's especially good when you were like, I'm a little worried this character's not going to be the way I... But then...
I know, and I won't normally go and see remakes because, when something is very precious...
Right.
But, oh my God, it's so good. It's so good. And it's so ambitious and just amazing. Amazing. And it's weird because... Do you know West Side Story?
Only vaguely.
Okay, well, it's kind of based on Romeo and Juliet, so it's not cheerful. Do you know what I mean? It's but somehow you come out of it feeling invigorated and hopeful, even though it's so sad, and you just spent the last hour bawling your eyes out. But anyway,
oh my goodness,
it was amazing. So I think it's coming out on streaming at the beginning of March.
Cool.
And
I'll have to keep an eye on it.
I will be watching it once a week forever because it's so good, so good, and yeah, so I've been making the kids listen to the music nonstop. So yeah.
That's good. That's good.
So I actually have a quote today from Steven Spielberg, who I feel like he is someone who, sometimes because something is so awesome for so long, you kind of don't appreciate it anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's oh yeah, Steven Spielberg, but he's such a genius when you actually think about... I was joking with my friend because I was like, Steven Spielberg is a genius, but I actually said Steve Spielberg, and I was like, check me out, I'm being very over familiar. And she was like, well, you have had a long relationship with him. And I was like, That's actually true, because all of my formative, like E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, like all of the things are so, yeah. Anyway, I love Steven Spielberg a lot. And just because he is, like, so good at what he does, you kind of don't even know how good he is at it, basically.
Yes, makes it look too easy to know how. Yeah.
Right, just like our teaching. Do you know what I mean?
Just
That's
like our teaching.
Yeah, like,
exactly.
Steven Spielberg. But he says, I don't dream at night. I dream all day. I dream for a living. And
Ooh.
I think that's something to really aspire to. But I also think there is an element of that in our jobs. Do you know what I mean? Like, we've talked about it a bit before, but we have to have some idealism or some sort of romanticism about the whole process to do what we do. And yeah, I like it. You know?
Yeah. And the dreaming's, you're not getting caught up in mundane things. You're trying to think about how you want things to be, or how you want the classroom to be, or the movie to be, or, it's much more, it just seems like the right mindset. I love it.
So, yeah, I love Steven Spielberg. And I think also something we talked about in a previous episode, like the sage on the stage. And just because something's been around a long time doesn't mean he's old-fangled. Do you know what I mean? Just like us. So, like, and then here he is making, like, the best movie ever. So, yeah. We need to get those old-fangled stickers, for sure. That's what we need. But, okay, so what are we talking about today?
So we're talking about when students want a grade adjustment and how we talk to them about that. And, I remember running into this in grad school early on in my very early stages of teaching and being like, whoa, this is a challenge. And I feel like I've gotten better at it. So anyway, I want to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. The first couple of times it was so stressful.
Yeah, totally.
And even when students weren't being aggro, like sometimes they were, but it felt like just an aggressive conversation.
Sure. And I think we've maybe mentioned before, initially when students would come in and say something like, oh, I think I got marked down wrong, I'd be like, oh my gosh, sorry, let me check on that. And now I'm like, okay, yes, let's look into it, but I'm pretty confident it didn't happen, and that's just a different mindset to be starting with, which is helpful.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's start with what's working for you.
So the things that have worked for me, and this is sort of has been more in the past. So when I was in a classroom and handed back the tests in the classroom.
Okay.
And so one thing I would say, and this was only after years of teaching and years of getting mobbed at the end of class, was saying, I am not discussing it today. Like, so I'm not discussing anything at the end of class at all. So you have to go home, look through the test, write me out a paragraph on the front of the test about what you want me to change and why, and then give it to me at the next period, like the next class. And that, I think, got rid of a lot of things, because a lot of people, if they just sat down for 2 seconds and looked through it, they would realize why they got points taken off. And then also, like, genuinely, sometimes when people would come at the end brandishing their test, I would get back to my office and I had no memory of what it was they wanted me to change. You know what I mean? So having that. And then I think asking students to articulate kind of rationally through writing what it is they wanted revisited is helpful. Do you know what I mean? And not just a vague sense of like, but like, you can't just take off this many points for this, like just that, but like what it is, and is it whatever it is. So so that was super helpful when I started implementing that in person. For some reason it all feels different I don't know how to have, with the online exams, I don't know how to implement that, because like, of course they're writing you an email, so they're already doing that bit of it, but then I don't know how to implement the like, I'm not talking to you about this for 24 hours, you know what I mean? And so but I think that was helpful to get them to go back through it and then write me something about what they wanted to have changed.
Now this is interesting. So I love that I really like if students are mobbing you right after you say, no, I'm not talking about it for 24 hours. I think that's a great idea. What I'm confused about, so I also like that you're saying if you're going to request some kind of grade change on one of these questions, this is how you do it. It's nice to have a system. It's nice that it involves them having to think it through. All of that makes sense to me. But what I'm confused about is like, do you have any concern that you're inviting people requesting grade changes by having like an official system that they all know
Oh,
about.
that's a really good point. It's weird. I totally get what you're saying, but in practice, it's had the opposite effect.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? But I totally get why you would totally. And one other thing actually that I did add in at that time was you have a week to come to me with stuff. And if you haven't come then, even if it was some bananas mistake I made, I'm not changing it. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
And that was born out of a student coming into my office the first semester I taught with every quiz and midterm and exam. And they were like, I'm going to sit here and find extra points because I'm on the cusp of a grade.
Wow.
And they sat there and they're like, is this right? Is this? And like, I was like, oh my God, this is so annoying. And so I was like, this is your responsibility, you know. So, but it didn't actually lead to more people doing it.
Okay.
It led to less somehow. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, I can definitely see that having the system, then, I mean, because your system involves reviewing the content in this set amount of time, and not when you're super emotional about it because you haven't just gotten it back, that does make sense. It would cut it down. So that's interesting.
Yeah, but I totally get what you're saying, that you're even just implanting the idea that you should
That it even exists,
and,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why it didn't translate into that. But I think, this sounds awful, but I think people are kind of lazy too, and they're like, you know, if I have to write a whole thing, then it's not worth. Do you know what I mean?
Well, so, I can also see, like, I've definitely had instructors say, double check my math, you know?
Right,
like, I added all this up.
That's what I kind of say more than where did I go wrong with. Yeah, so it's definitely, like, that's the implication.
Okay, more. So that makes sense. So you're not necessarily saying go through and find any points that I took off that you could argue. But you're saying, you know, do a quick double check because it's possible that I added up all the points wrong.
Totally. And I think, you know, and I do make, because, you know, I'm like obsessed with getting stuff back quickly because I just want it off my plate. So I do kind of even say it in that framing of like, I, you know, did these very quickly. I want to make sure they got back to you. So do check that it was added up correctly. But yeah, I don't invite.
That's I can see that tone wouldn't invite tons of people.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay, so tell me, what works for you?
Okay, so I mentioned that this used to be a bigger problem in grad school. And it could just be a population difference where it's like more of a culture of asking for grade changes at the school I went to grad school in than where I am now. But
do you think also because you were younger? Or people
well, maybe. I mean, definitely. I've changed my approach, and I've changed my thoughts about it, and so I think that has made a difference.
Yes.
So now, like I say, if a student comes in and says, "Oh, I think there was a mistake on this," or "I think I should have more points," or something, my default thought is probably not.
Right.
But you know, of course, we can look at it, and so just having that mindset from the get-go myself of probably not is helpful for me to enter this.
I feel like I was literally like a cartoon character when they would ask. And I'd be like, oh no, what did I do? Like in the beginning, but now you're like you're like, yeah, no. Like, but yeah. Like,
of course, like I will look through it. We'll discuss it. We'll see if that's true. Of course, we need to investigate this. So default is no, because I really don't want grade adjustments to be the norm. We were kind of talking about this last week, setting the norms. So even if, you know, okay, sure, should it have been 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10? Sure, maybe it should have been 8 out of 10, but it's about the same. I don't want to just change something for some small reason because that sets the norm of, oh, you should definitely go to Claire's office hours and get a couple points back. That's not that's not our norm. That's not what we're doing.
Yeah.
So instead, I try to be clear and fair to begin with in what my expectations are. You know, I try to make sure that it's written in the assignment protocol or in the grade thing that says, like, these are the things you do. So that it's very clear, oh, you didn't do those things. So, of course, you didn't get full credit, you know? And then leave some explanation when I take points off. It doesn't have to be super detailed. I don't have to justify everything because that's starting to get into too much grading burden. But just, you know, don't just say -1. I like to say -1
units.
Some indication of what the problem was, you know? So I'm hoping that by being clear and fair in my expectations to begin with, and then my grading reflects on, you know, did you do the things that were in the grading criteria? Like in in the question, I asked for these things. So those are the things I'm looking for when I'm grading. So hopefully that nips all these things in the bud. Kind of like you're saying, if they look at it, they'll say, oh, yes, I did do just this, and I see that she wasn't asking, you know. But then if someone does still come to my office, I try to say no firmly but briefly, and then kind of switch the conversation around to talking about content, you know, like,
nice,
okay, yes, you did get 7 out of 10 on that, because let's talk about the content and try to make sure that now you understand the content, because that's really the important thing here. And in the process, they'll be seeing what they didn't put in the question and moving on. So that's what I try to do now.
Well, I love that, because something that I struggle so much with, though, is framing that the test is designed for, like, you to learn the content. Right. Do you know what I mean? It's not just this game system. You know what I mean? And sometimes when people are talking about points or whatever, it can feel like that. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, oh, and so, points like, back and you're missing the whole point. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I see why they're feeling that way, of course, because they are getting a grade. So I try to mention, if it's like the exam 1, it's like, well, the important thing is that now you understand that and you'll know it moving forward, and we'll be building on it through the class. And so you lost some points now for not having known it at that moment, but you're going to get all these points later for knowing it later. So like that's what we're trying to. The point is that you know it now. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that. That's really...
Yeah.
And then also, you know, as much as possible, and what you're doing does that, like pivoting it back to their responsibility, do you know what I mean? Not just... Because I've had students who are like, why did you do this to me? Like, I didn't do anything. You didn't know the thing. Right. And kind of really highlighting that that's what's going on. Yeah. It's not... Yeah.
I totally agree. Their responsibility, and also they are the ones taking this class wanting to learn this material. So it's about them learning the material that they signed up because they wanted to learn. So like trying to get it back to what we're actually doing, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
And I will add, there have been the odd cases where I've actually made a mistake in grading, and I do make the change. But I those should be like the fewest and farthest between. That's not like, oh yes, tiny error. That's like, oh, my answer key is wrong. Whoops, I need to change everybody's question 7. It's not like that's really. There are times when I need to do that, but I really. That's the bare minimum. Trying not to have that happen. Extreme case kind of thing, you know.
It's funny when it's just experience, because I really remember early on, like maybe my second semester teaching, someone emailed me and they were just like, I am scandalized. Like, why did you choose to do this? Why would you choose this grade? And I was like, oh my God, what did I do? Like, what have I done? And then I went and checked this person, and they literally had gotten like 35% in absolutely every single graded thing we did. Do you know what I mean? So it was like, what? And they even had written in the email, like, sure, maybe the midterm wasn't perfect or all, but I immediately was like, what did I do? Like, maybe I put in the number backwards or did some,
right.
And then you were like, oh no, okay, never mind. And then when that happens enough, you're like, okay, I'm not going to freak out about this. It probably isn't, like you said, it probably isn't me.
Not having that huge initial freak out reaction is so helpful for actually addressing whatever the actual problem is. Sure, and so in this case, the problem was the student didn't understand properly that they were failing until they saw the F or whatever it was.
Yeah, you know? Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you working on?
So I think some things I'm working on is one thing that I do when I'm talking to students to try, I really want to encourage good problem solving skills. And part of that is like writing out solutions really clearly. Okay. And so one thing I always say is, you know, if you solve a problem and if it's an algebra error, you won't lose as many points as if it's something like you didn't physically understand. So it's really important to make it clear. Yeah. But then somehow then people are like, but you took off points, but I only had an algebra error. And I'm like, yes, I'm still going to take off points for an algebra error, but not like all the points. You know what I mean? So sometimes I need to work on that reassurance. I think sometimes it's gone too far the other way, where people are surprised. They're like, but it's just a calculator error. And you're like, yes, but you still don't deserve the exact same points as the person who did not make the calculator error.
I see.
You know what I mean?
So there's that. Sorry, that sounds like just a phrasing thing. Like now that you're aware, that's a misconception that sometimes goes around. you can say you would only get 9 out of 10 instead of 0 or whatever.
And there is times where I find myself just like, oh, what does all of this mean? Because when people are like, but why, like, why does me putting the numbers in the calculator wrong? Like, I knew what I was doing. And you're like, but then, you know, being careful is part of the thing, right? And so...
Right. And if you get an unreasonable answer or you get the wrong answer, I mean, yeah, you didn't solve the problem, you know?
Right. And, you know, yeah. So that, I think, the other thing is, like you mentioned before, like, what do you do when you have made a mistake? You know?
Right.
And I haven't really had to do this because I've always been in reasonably small classes, but my dread would be to have to be like, can everyone hand back in their papers? Because I actually made a mistake with, you know, so I definitely, that would be hard. And there was definitely a time where I think it was one point, and I think in the end I was like, I'm not changing this for everyone. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Because whatever. But it's so tricky because you can't just add on a point because then the people who do, you know, anyway. So that, and then sometimes I do find it really hard to hold my ground. Like I had a discussion with a student who was like, but it was just a slip of the pen. Like they were writing, and as they were transcribing things, they left out a number going from one line to another. And it is hard because like in terms of physics concepts, that's not what I'm testing.
Right.
But it's still important, and like you still can't get the same marks as someone who didn't do that. And I think...
Right, you still got the wrong answer. Yeah.
And even since that happened, I have it clearer in my mind to say, like, there's various parts of physics. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm, like, sure, there's conceptual understanding, but communication involves having your work laid out really nicely and carefully, right? Because obviously I'm not doing that, but someday someone could be using physics to calculate a rocket trajectory, and
if you drop the 1 between these lines, the rocket's not going to go to the right spot, no matter how well you understood the content.
Everyone. No, but like, yeah, I mean, that's the vibe I need to be taking. But I have a cousin who's like an engineer, and just listening to him describing like how his stress levels in the beginning, like designing like doorway weight bearing, and I was like, I just could not handle that. That would be so stressful if there was such a big impact. But anyway, so it does matter.
That's a good example that you could tell, I mean, of why messing it up in your calculator is a big deal.
Totally.
Because you need to understand the concept, but you also need to get the right answer.
Right, and there's so many... I would love to, in my own head, really distill down all of the things in physics. Because I don't think I'd actually thought about that particular thing necessarily until this discussion with the student. But, you know, now it is important to me, actually. Like, the concepts are important, but also, yeah. So that's, I think the reassuring thing is a phrasing thing, like you said. And then this is just... me having that conviction myself, because like, you know, when you're saying, you're like, no, you're probably wrong, like I just need to find that about that thing. So yeah. So what are you working on?
So I'm working on when a student has missed several assignments and trying to talk with them about how to get back on track and caught up. And I have this system that I'm feeling pretty good about, but I'm not sure it works in all the cases. So my system is, I usually talk about trajectory. I'm all about the word trajectory. I feel like I might have mentioned this on the podcast before. Like, it's all about getting back on a good trajectory. Just forget about the assignments that you missed in the past and focus on getting the next assignment in on time. Do it as well as you can. And, you know, we're just trying to get to the point where you're handing in the assignments at the same time everyone else is moving on with the class.
So... Yeah, sorry, no, you go. Keep going.
Yeah, so, I mean, I like that. I guess I want to clarify, I'm not saying that I'm going to remove those zeros of the past, but I am saying that the best thing to move forward is to stay current with the assignments and get on track.
Well, and I think something that we, like, part of our job is to get students to stop doing magical thinking. You know, the magical thinking where they're like, oh yeah, I'll just get caught up on these 4. And then like, and you're like, it's this, you're barely able to, like you said, like the goal is to actually be handing in 1 thing a week, not magically hand in 6 things 1 week. And then, yeah, so I think that's so important to not feed into the magical thinking by being like, okay, sure, let me know when you've done those. So, yeah, I think that's perfect.
Right. Yeah, totally. So I'm into that. I think that's good most of the time. But I do wonder whether there are some occasions where some students might benefit more from me saying, a little more directly, like, you are failing and need to turn things around, you know? And normally that's not the approach that I take. But I'm not sure if so like normally if a student doesn't hand in an assignment, I put a 0 and I send them a little note saying, hey, forget about this, focus on getting the next one. And I like that positive approach and telling them how to get on track so they aren't like, what should I even be doing? Or maybe we'll have a conversation and have that discussion. But I just wonder whether some students might need to hear, hey, you need to change things up, you know?
I know. And what I wonder, because it's interesting, like we have talked in, I feel like, again, I'm like the mysterious university we were at, the university I was just working at with you. Like we've talked about having points in the program where you have this check-in. Like, but I wonder, is there like dates in the calendar for like on a smaller scale within a semester where it should be, okay, friends, so I'm reaching out to let you know that if you continue on this trajectory, it's, you know what I mean? Like, is there...
That's like a good idea. And we have talked about that in the past. Like, what if the semester ended right now? This is the grade you would have. Just like a little check-in so they for sure know. You know, because we've talked about, you know, at our the way that my university works, we have this Canvas page and all the grades are in there. So they see their number grade, but of course number grades don't always tell you what the letter grade means. So it might be nice to just let them know. So that's a good point. Maybe that would serve that purpose, is if we had the little check-in.
Yeah, and again, I don't know, like, so for you, because I think yours is like almost, because it's like so focused on the lab assignment, like the lab write-ups, like it's extremely continuous assessment, do you know what I mean? And so is there a point where you're like, okay, look, if you've not done 3, you're really in the danger zone? Do you know what I mean? Like for me, the midterms are the point where I'm like, anyone who got below this grade really needs to come to my next office hours and talk to me. And
okay, that's good. So you have kind of a check-in point automatically there with the midterms.
But I wonder for you, is there kind of a point where you sort of notice like, okay, this is going so sideways? If they're around week 4, if they're not handing stuff in, or
yeah, that's a good point. I like that idea. And I do, you know, if they've missed a few assignments, I do generally do a check-in, but I guess I don't have in my mind a set number, like definitely check in at this point, and that might be helpful.
I'm asking you a question, and I'm asking it on the assumption that none of your future students are listening to this, but do you ever make the zeros go away, or do you do, like, is there a point where it's like, okay, look, you're actually going to fail, like even if you do the rest of the homeworks, you're in dire straits, or like, is there...
Well, sometimes I have told students, like if they totally fall on their face at the beginning of the semester and I say, hey, just focus on getting this back on track. If you are back on track, if you the rest of the semester are handing things in, then I'll wait.
Totally, and I totally do
shown
that.
That you have learned how to do this stuff.
I don't advertise it, but
I don't like that to be like my go-to policy, but I feel like if they did get on a really awesome trajectory and clearly demonstrate some stuff that they learned that they would have shown in those early reports, but for sure they've demonstrated it now, then I wouldn't mind waiting them.
Yeah, this is super helpful to me, because as soon as you said the thing about, okay, just don't try and catch, like, do just start from now, like, it's like completely makes sense to me, and it's like something I believe, but I don't think I've explicitly said that necessarily, and I think that's really important to kind of like not feed the magical thinking and the what if I get like I had that conversation so many times, people are like, well, if I get 100% in the final, will you pass me? And a couple of times I've been like, absolutely, totally, because there's no way if you have not worked the entire semester, you can't. And
and if they did, you might even feel okay doing that. But it is kind of magical.
I know. And having participated in a bit of that in my life, I recognize it when I see it.
Oh, I do it all the time. Oh, I'll finish grading in the next hour, no problem.
I know.
So it's good to help with that. So, well, thanks, Ruth. This has been helpful to think about. I think I will implement some kind of check-in system so that I can let them know that they're failing while still having the more positive, this is how you move forward.
Well, I mean, that's the thing I think we talked about on here. For me, the difference between the first midterm discussion, which is like, you can turn it around, and then the second midterm discussion is like, oh, well, there's always next year, and it's a lot more miserable. So yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Claire.
Cool. Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.